Hi, fellow travelers of the internet. I am the long-haired freaky dude, and today I'm going to review the epic Grecian poem, the Odyssey of Homer, or Ulysses in this case, translated into English by Samuel Butler. Now, whenever you read any book that has been translated from its native language, you are really reading the translator's rendition of whatever it is you're reading. With that said, I'm not really critiquing Homer's Iliad, for if I were, I'd have to have read it in its native language of ancient Greek. We've all heard the saying, don't judge a book by its cover. Well, that rule especially applies to this book here. I don't mean the literal cover, I mean the first page. If you've never read one of the two works of Homer translated by Samuel Butler, then you might be caught off guard by three primary points, which at first may seem destructive to the book, but upon further reading may prove to actually do it much justice. The first thing which you'll notice is that it's not written in dactylic hexameter, or hexameter, like the text from Aristarchus, from which most translations derive, nor is it even poetic. No, just plain old English prose. In other words, it reads like a novel. When I first came across a translation like this, I wondered how it could be remotely possible to dare translate Homer unpoetically. When I first came across this, which was in Samuel Butler's The Iliad, I was about ready to put the book down then and there and search for another translation. But I read on and was pleasantly surprised to find that Samuel did the epic poem much justice, perhaps even more justice than a poetic translation. The same applies to his version of the Odyssey. It was very easy to understand and follow, and did in fact read like a novel. Now that I look back, I think that if one is to translate a work from its native language, they should not attempt to keep it in its original poetic strangleholds. I realize that with these rules in place, the translator is often struggling to find a word that complies with the poetic structure and the language to which it is being translated, and may sometimes choose one which doesn't quite make sense. Or they may just rearrange the words in an unpractical order to where they fit with another rhyming word or to fit syllable structure. If this happens, then the original author's intentions are severely ruptured, and they will sometimes be thought of as a terrible writer simply because of their translator's dirty work. When in prose, however, the intentions of the author are only to be minimally jumbled by the interpretation of the translator. So if you want to read the translation closest to the stories and the intentions of the original, then read this one right here. If you want to read a poetic version and get the same from it, learn Greek and read the original. The next thing I notice is that Samuel translates Greek gods and names to Roman whenever possible. If this isn't possible, he keeps the Greek names. At first I thought this would be a challenging obstacle to get over, but I was quickly able to convert the Roman names to the Greek names, which I now know much better on my own. If it does get a bit challenging for you, but you really want to read this translation, then I suggest purchasing or renting a catalog of Greek and Roman gods, which give translations. Internet works well too. The third and final point is that this book seemed hard as hell to read and understand, but that was just the first paragraph. After I read a few pages, I adapted to Samuel's style and flew right along with his Odyssey. And now, I warn you, there may be a few minimal spoilers from this point. So, what is Ulysses about? To sum it up in one short sentence, it's about the epic voyage of Ulysses, the king of Ithaca, as he returns home from fighting at Troy. Throughout his journey, many wonderful and amazing tales are told. It is clear to see why this work has stood the test of time. Now, as much as I'd like to talk about each one of them, and tell you these wonderful stories, I won't, because it may ruin your reading experience. During Ulysses' long return, his home becomes very corrupt with people, known as suitors, who are trying to take Ulysses' wife, Penelope. One thing I'd have to say that caught me off guard is that many of the epic tales of Ulysses that we now know of were told in only about 3 of the 24 books, or chapters as it were, which make up this story. Nonetheless, the other 21 books were very good as well. Definitely worth the read. If you've never read an ancient Greek poem or play before, these characters may seem quite arrogant, mean, barbaric, stubborn. There are many slanders which could fit these guys today, but you must consider the conditions they lived in back then. If you were not honored, or if you were shamed by someone, everyone knew about it, and you'd always be ridiculed, and wouldn't be able to make it anywhere in life, until you changed this title. Also, you should know that in Greek writing, people are usually referred to with three forms: their name, their father's name, or patronymics, or their mother's name, matronymics, or an epithet, which is a descriptive word added to the name. The last isn't used much in this translation, however, but you may see it in the Iliad quite a bit. Another thing which should not be too surprising is that because the gods, in particular Zeus, Jove as it's translated, control the we humans, have little to do with the sway of things. In addition, Jove reveals much of his plans as well as the plot of the book very early on. While there is some suspense, the frequent use of foreshadowing from the gods eliminates most of it. In the times of the ancient Greeks, suspense would have been more favored in character development than plot, as to where it seems to be the other way around today. One thing which took me by surprise was the amount of blood, guts, and gore in this book. I love gore in a novel, especially descriptive gore, but this has to be some of the most descriptive yet. Even more so than, quite possibly, Mr. King. That's saying something. Now, a lot of people think that it's necessary to read the Iliad before the Odyssey because it's somewhat of a sequel. Well, really it isn't. It's recommended, but it isn't necessary. Another thing which should be cleared up is that the Iliad and the Odyssey were part of something called an epic cycle, which was composed of many, many epic poems, not all written by Homer. These are only two which have survived. There were quite a few in the epic cycle, actually. Now there was a poem which came after the Odyssey. While the text is gone, disappeared, we still know what happened in this poem, somewhat. I learned what happened right after I finished the epic conclusion of the Odyssey. It was very sad. I mean, there were some sad parts in the Odyssey, but after reading just this short blurb of what happens afterward, it almost brought tears to my eyes. So I warn you, look it up at your own risk, but only after you've read this book, so that it actually means something. It's called Telogony, in case you're interested in being sad like I was, and maybe listen to an all-violin version of Smells Like Teen Spirit while reading, for full effect. Well, folks, I guess that's all I have to say about this translation of the Odyssey, which I absolutely love. It's a great book which has by no means withered with age. Please, if you haven't already read some form of this epic, do so right now. But even if you have, I highly encourage that you read this translation right here. Here, I'll help you out by reading the first few paragraphs for you. Gee, aren't I a swell guy? Book 1. Tell me, O Muse, of that ingenious hero who traveled far and wide after he had sacked the famous town of Troy. Many cities did he visit, and many were the nations with whose manners and customs he was acquainted. Moreover, he suffered much by sea while trying to save his own life and bring his men safely home. But do what he might, he could not save his men, for they perished through their own sheer folly in eating the cattle of the sun god Hyperion. So the god prevented them from ever reaching home. Tell me, too, about all these things, O daughter of Jove, from whatsoever source you may know them. So now, all who escaped death in battle or by shipwreck had got safely home except Ulysses, and he, though he was longing to return to his wife and country, was detained by the goddess Calypso, who had got him into a large cave and wanted to marry him. But as years went by, there came a time when the gods settled that he should go back to Ithaca. Even then, however, when he was among his own people, his troubles were not yet over. Nevertheless, all the gods had now begun to pity him, except Neptune, who still persecuted him without ceasing and would not let him get home. Now Neptune had gone off to Ethiopians, who were at the world's end, and lie in two halves, the one looking west and the other east. He had gone there to accept a hecatomb of sheep and oxen, and was enjoying himself at his festival. But the other gods met in the house of Olympian Jove, and the sire of gods and men spoke first. At the moment he was thinking of Aegisthus, who had been killed by Agamemnon's son, Orestes. So he said to the other gods, "See now, how men lay blame upon us gods for what is after all nothing but their own folly. Look at Aegisthus. He must needs make love to Agamemnon's wife unrighteously, and then kill Agamemnon, though he knew it would be the death of him. For I sent Mercury to warn him not to die either of these things, inasmuch as Orestes would be sure to take his revenge when he grew up and wanted to return home. Mercury told him in all good will, but he would not listen, and now he has paid for everything in full." Well, that's a bit of the translator's style there. I do hope it encourages you to perhaps buy or rent this book and read the rest of it, because it will be well worth your time. Thank you for watching a Crazy Jake, an LZ Productions, and a Bibliophile Productions. Have a good day.